Hi, hello everyone. Thank you for joining today's session. I'm Michelle Melka, Senior Director, BU Marketing Lead at BioMarin. I'm excited to be here with our colleagues from across the industry to explore how we can build stronger engagement strategies in today's complex healthcare environment. Over the next 60 minutes, we will share practical insights on tailoring messages for diverse customer groups, improving collaboration across functions, and effectively communicating scientific value. My role will be to frame the discussion, highlight how these strategies translate into real-world impact for patients, providers, and the broader healthcare system. It's a great honor to introduce our panelists. Maybe Yvette, you can go first and tell us who you are.
Sure. It's great to be with everyone today. I'm Yvette Venable. I am currently leading what we call payer partnerships and payer policy within global market access and pricing at AstraZeneca. And I'm here today to kind of carry the flag for how we think about how we message to payers and policymakers in order to achieve appropriate value recognition within the very dynamic spaces that we're working in.
Terrific. Michele?
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Michele Siccardi. I'm working in CSL Behring here in Zurich, and I'm heading the international insight analytics team. So all countries outside the US, and I think I will give a contribution around data source, data point behind stakeholder mapping and the topic of this event.
Perfect. And our colleague Martina Dempsey is having a bit of technical difficulties. So when she joins,
Michelle, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
Yay, perfect. Hello, welcome. Please
Thank you.
introduce yourself. Yes.
Yes, hi everybody. Nice to be here finally. I'm the VP of Commercial Strategy and Operations at Astellas for established markets, which are basically European markets and Canada. I've been 11 years with Astellas in a variety of commercial roles, including GM and global transformation and this current regional role. So looking forward to hopefully bringing my diverse perspectives to the conversation as well. Thank you.
Amazing. Perfect. And then for everyone listening, thanks for joining us. If you have questions, please submit them during the chat and we will get to them. So maybe we'll just get started with our first question on, how has stakeholder mapping evolved beyond traditional HCP relationships? And maybe I'll just kick us off. Thinking about maybe traditionally we maybe just thought about our HCPs, and I think today's complex environment, we really think about tailoring and connecting messaging across multiple stakeholders. Really thinking about how do we set a clear value narrative? How do we, differentiate with strategic positionings? For myself in marketing, how do we be bold and memorable, and really differentiate ourselves across the competition? I think tone really matters when we're thinking about multiple stakeholders. For patients, really having that empathy; for our HCPs, having that trust in scientific communication; for payers, the evidence-based pieces; and for our advocates, how are we forward thinking to advance the causes for the community? So as I continue to think through this point, data sources and the evolution of how we utilize data, I think has really also evolved and moved us forward from maybe a world of structured data, traditional claims, et cetera, to unstructured data where we're really building a broader picture of the ecosystem as a whole and using different data sources, let's say like social, digital influencing, or advocacy group activities on top of the claims, and creating that map of how everything is interacting and changing. Michele, how do you see, data sources and analytical tools really help you map this multi-stakeholder ecosystem?
Yeah, no, thank you, Michelle. And yeah, a couple of concepts I would like to share. So the first one, I think that probably we cannot talk in terms of data or data source in isolation. I see stakeholder mapping very much connected to the segmentation, and that means that the more we evolve from the classic potential segmentation to behavioral segmentation to channel segmentation, I believe that actually the kind of data now that we need to identify to do this effort is really evolving dramatically. Now, said that, talking about the data sources, the data point, especially we are using here in CSL Behring, I think the simple to me the better. So the classic publication network analysis that help us now to identify connection across authors is still to me a very valid starting point to identify the different influencing map. An evolution we are also implementing here is complementing the network analysis with the impact factor analysis. So in a certain way, you weight different stakeholders based on the weight of this different publication. You can infer the capacity to influence and to drive behavior to be an advocate for you or not. Another effort we were doing, probably not in this company, when I was in my previous company, was very much on the social network listening. And here, talking about stakeholder mapping, we did an additional step because actually we start to try to identify the connection across patients rather than ACP. So we started to gather data regarding the kind of relationship between patient discussing in open forum and also the kind of conversation, so the trending topic, if you like, that were discussed. Here, I watch out that probably is not something new, but I think it's important to keep in mind it is to be able to make a distinction between noise and really trends and pattern. And to me, that's the most complex thing. Again, this is an effort that I did a few years ago. I guess now with the sophistication of machine learning solution and the capacity of artificial intelligence to better clean the conversation, probably this problem could be overcome. But traditionally, that was the main challenge. And then, of course, we're going to use the classical IQVIA data, and also for channel affinity. That's an area I think critical not to identify if digital versus face-to-face are the proper channel. Also here we use the classic IQVIA data provider for to understand the channel affinity of the different stakeholders. So hopefully this is a summary of the key, let's say, data sources I'm used and the pros and cons of each of them.
Yes, yeah, and a nice way to map, I think, how we're starting to see key players and the clusters of influence and how all these things come together. I think really interesting points. Maybe Martina, Yvette, when we think about how do we manage through some of this consistent core messaging, and really start to think about localizing the execution, what does that look like in practice?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. I mean, I guess it's the key priority for all companies, really. And I guess there's probably multiple different ways and approaches. But at Astellas, what we want to do is sort of build global strategies that empower rather than dictate to our market affiliates. And to do this means really engaging with affiliates throughout the development of the global strategies so that we can understand their needs from the very beginning and leverage their local insights, importantly, in terms of the creation of the global strategies and tactics. We developed a quite adaptable cross-functional global model with mechanisms to collect the insights and to action the feedback, both in the creation of the brand strategies as well as the kind of the global tactics that are associated with the brand. So this co-creation process not only creates just the global strategy, but also all the way through then into the tactical execution of the associated content and the activities in the market. So it's a very globalized co-creation based approach. Now, the vehicle for this work is what we call the brand global co-creation team, and the clue is in the name. It's used really to create the global strategy for the brand in a really cross-functional, integrated way. And as the name suggests, co-creation is the key within this process. So it embeds the needs of the different healthcare systems and the different cultures in the development and the implementation of the brand strategies. However, given the size of the global markets, we really need to consider balance, because on the one hand, we have a huge breadth of information available to make the strategies and the tactics relevant and actionable for all. But on the other hand, the size of the process has to be feasible to deliver something tangible. And so as such, in Astellas, we focus on the top 15 global priority markets. And for each brand, there will be a subset of those priority markets, maybe 4 or 5 markets that participate in the specific brand co-creation team. And these 4 to 5 markets are normally the markets which deliver, say, 80% of the global value of that particular brand, so are most critical, if you like. So as well as the global and local participation in the co-creation, we also it's a truly cross-functional process. So we have marketing, medical, market access, patient partnerships, public affairs, you know, and all the other groups that represent the diversity of the stakeholders that the strategy will need to align with. And so it starts with the creation of the integrated global plan, and then the same approach is used to create the global tactics and the content that aligns with that plan. So the outputs of the process is a suite of global tactics and a suite of global foundational content in these global foundational content packs. Now, these tactics and content are obviously completely consistent with global strategy, but they have enough breadth to cover global diversity, both in terms of compliance needs and specificities to local value creation, because otherwise, you know, we're doing all this work and there'll be no engagement because they'll be deemed to be irrelevant, right? So the
100%.
the intent is that we want to kind of we want our markets to make derivatives of these foundational contents, not local revisions of them, for example, or not their local creations. And therefore, it's important that we maintain them iterative. We listen to feedback. So as things change, the content goes into the market, the stakeholders respond to it. And we basically need to make sure that we have an iterative loop to listen to this feedback. And so both the outputs and the inputs are regularly shared with these 15 priority markets to make sure that we have engagement, but also that what's being pushed out is relevant and usable. Now, you might ask the 15 markets, well, we have many more markets than 15 in the world, and what happens to the smaller guys and the mid-sized markets? They're not really excluded from this process either. They're not involved in the co-creation process per se, but they are arranged in areas or clusters, and these area heads sort of come into this process alongside the priority markets and act as a two-way conduit for those markets, for, you know, so that they have a voice and they have a very clear translation of the strategies as well. So that's how we get to consistent core messaging. But the second part of the question, I think, is around how do we localize the execution. And as I mentioned at the beginning, you know, we don't want to dictate. We really want engagement and empowerment at the affiliate level, because they're the people closest to the customers. They understand what their market and stakeholder needs. They need to be able to evolve their understandings and adapt their approaches quite quickly. So we create up to 3 different variations of the content in the foundational packs, and there are clear guardrails around local tailoring that allow them to be empowered within that freedom, within that frame, if you like, for local adaptation, while trying to maintaining the, you know, the alliance or the alignment with the strategy. Now, the other thing is that it's okay to create and ask the countries to use it. We have also had to focus on developing capabilities that allow the teams to execute on this global content and make it easy for them to do so, so to speak, because that supports the overall usage. So we have things like, you know, content planning calendars, so they can see what's coming when. You know, we've kind of got a make a copy function in our content vaults that makes it easy for markets to create derivative content. And we create all our content, as most people do now, I guess, in modular formats that allows them to tailor. And also we provide, we have a content production, a free internal content production service. That means that local affiliates don't have to spend their budgets outside, but if they use the global content, they can sort of generate it freely. So I suppose to summarize, it's really important that the clarity and alignment exists within the co-creation team, and that it's cascaded right across the priority and the smaller markets to all the cross-functional teams. You need really strong communication for it to underpin this, and you know, and to drive that two-way exchange around evolution and continual updating of the materials and the strategies. And I think, yeah, that's a kind of a summary of how we do it. It's an end-to-end process, if you like, but has evolved over the last couple of years and seems to be working quite well now.
Amazing. Sounds like it's a great balance of being able to have that consistent messaging flow, being able to have local markets tailored to what they need, but also probably stakeholders to be more dynamic with each individual stakeholder. Yvette, when I think of this, it makes me think too, like how we can tailor maybe this type of thinking for specifically for payers.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of cross-functional working, we do have very similar models within AstraZeneca. But I'd like to start with kind of just saying, when we think of what a payer is, that is going to mean something differently depending on your health system, right? So when you're thinking about segmenting your audiences and doing all your stakeholder mapping, it's really important to think about who exactly is that payer, what is the process to even get to that payer decision making, who influences that along the way, so that we can tailor and adapt the messaging to ensure that we're really helping influence that decision maker to fully recognize the value appropriately. So that's quite key, and it isn't static at all. So it's probably less joined up sometimes than it is on the product specific messaging. That said, it's really important, again, that when we're working in cross-functional teams as the market access team, that we use a lot of the scientific narratives and commercial messaging that has been developed, because those stakeholders are absolutely having an influence on that payer decision making, right? So the actual messaging may be slightly different. The entry point might be different. So sometimes it's really helpful for that core narrative, as Martina was describing, to be an actual narrative rather just messaging. And that way we can adapt it more specifically in the market in order to resonate best with the particular influencer or stakeholder that we're trying to reach. So a couple of examples of this, we oftentimes will work with patient stakeholders in market access to really contextualize what the patient needs are for our market access stakeholders and influencers. And that involves not just having the data, but make sure we're really putting the human face on that data and making sure that they're able to have an engagement with an HTA or with a payer in order to express their point of view about what's most important to them from a patient perspective, so that payers can make those decisions based on the data that we bring to them and knowing what's most important to patients. Another way in which this is really important is when standards of care are changing very rapidly in a new area, because more innovative treatments have come to market, right? And so we need to work very closely with our scientific and commercial colleagues in order to help the payers then understand what is routine clinical practice, what endpoints are being used to measure disease progression, how routine is that data collection on those endpoints, so that payers can have a bit more certainty that what our drug is proposed to be doing is actually doing what it says it can be doing. So how we engage with those stakeholders, or those different stakeholders, at the right time, the right cascade of messaging, is super important. So while we do try and mirror as best we can that cross-functional working from our global to our local teams, we're also conscious from a market access and payer perspective that we may not have the same level of resources in all of our different markets. And so it takes a kind of an extra special effort to make sure we're really joined up to be able to deliver and tailor those messages appropriately in those markets. So we work very closely with not just our national teams, but they often have field access teams or sub-regional payers that we're trying to reach, and how do we work with them to make sure they have the right messaging to go and reach their stakeholders as well.
Oh, for sure. I think, a couple things that you mentioned that really resonate is just that share of the customer voice, like understanding really at the center of everything is how do we understand what the patient really needs? How do we amplify what that is and then carry that across our customer stakeholder base? I think across each stakeholder is so critical. I think about how do we coordinate this across all these multiple functions, within market access, within medical marketing, and then, especially when we need to engage the same healthcare system that may be evolving at the same time that we're evolving. Maybe Martina, if you can comment on how operating models have potentially changed and supported the evolution that's happening across the business.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, you know, we've got now really complex, as you mentioned, really complex stakeholder and customer landscapes, and creating the very real challenge that Yvette's outlined there. You know, the kind of the coordination and the alignment of multiple function interactions, through and also compounded by the large number of channels we now have and touch points at our disposal. You know, a few years ago it was face to face, and they're much easier coordinated, right? But now everybody's talking to everybody in this massively complex ecosystem. So how do we align and how do we make sure that we're consistent? So I think there's three important elements to enable this to be done effectively. The first one is around defining the customer facing roles clearly, their interfaces and their required competencies. The second one is identifying the customer stakeholder landscape clearly, as sort of as was discussed earlier on, you know, the importance of understanding and mapping the interfaces and the connectivity between customers and stakeholders. And then the third one, I think, as you've mentioned, you know, Michelle, is the operating model is really important. How do we coordinate and pull it all together inside in the company? So on the first one, I mean, I think the challenge around the roles is a critical one because, you know, if we think about how roles have changed, we used to have quite siloed, pillared, very discrete commercial customer interfacing roles. But now like our commercial teams need to be really scientifically accomplished, you know, aware of the therapy area, aware of the market access landscape beyond their medicine, and to enable real value added conversations. And, you know, equally then there's an elevated expectation of our medical teams that they have a greater degree of business acumen and to understand the customer's ecosystem, you know, the tensions and the budgetary challenges they're dealing with. And, you know, market access obviously requires the ability to articulate complex clinical economic value propositions. So while all the roles require strong collaboration skills and a high level of adaptability, what we see is that the customer facing roles are all coming closer together in terms of their scope. And indeed, some companies have tried to create new kind of hybrid roles, you know, like looking at hybrid roles, looking at medical representatives versus and MSLs or key account management and field market access. But to be honest, the confusion around role clarity and kind of compliance concerns has kind of I think that's dropping out of favor now. So I think the roles need to be very carefully, internally, very carefully, very clearly defined. While they're coming closer together and they may have overlapping interfaces, we need really clear role profiles, capabilities, and competency frameworks to kind of delineate those. Because when they go out into the customer ecosystem, they need to be very clear about what each other are doing. And I think Michaela earlier talked about, you know, really great profiling, segmentation, and targeting, KE mapping, etc., have been really essential. But what we now have is, as he described, a really comprehensive stakeholder identification is much more important, spanning, as Yvette talked about, national, regional, and local level. So we need to know who we're talking to and have that really clear and clearly aligned with the roles. And then finally, we need internally the operating model to support that collaboration and sharing on a really in a live and organic way. So, you know, in Astellas, we've moved our operating model in the last year to what we call a brand at the center operating model, where we have dedicated cross-functional teams with each, the members are all dedicated to the specific brand in that market setting. And we have strong representatives from the field facing team members as well. The brand teams align fully on their objectives, and they align fully, they're completely empowered and accountable to be agile and responsive to the outside market or whatever. So they're sitting there together with a common objective that drives a common outcome, and they're working together to align their external engagements and their imperatives with the ever-changing stakeholder network. And they have to be quite agile in changing their plans and moving their money around and moving their resources around and moving their focus around as well. So that's very important as well. Other things that have kind of elevated in importance in our company is kind of really cross-functional key account management, right in the heart of the institution. So where there's a really kind of holistic shared understanding of the customers and the stakeholders in and around that institution, and kind of aligned and tailored communication plans and engagement plans, really tightly prepared to make sure that we have one voice from the company in that institution. And then finally, I think, you know, omnichannel is both a gift and a problem if we're firing out multiple misaligned messages and touch points right across the digital network. So we have a very a tight kind of co-creation approach around customer journeys and stakeholder journeys within those brand teams to make sure that what messaging is going through the multiple channels is aligned. I would just make one last point if I could though, and it's around organizational culture, because all of the constructs, all of the processes in the world do not work unless there is an organizational culture that expects collaboration and common working. And in Astellas, you know, a number of our values and behaviors are really strongly focused on cross-functional collaboration, collective and individual accountability, and having a common outcome focus very clearly at the heart of everyone's work. So, you know, bringing those values into day-to-day work, into those brand teams, enables that kind of collaboration and alignment from top to bottom.
Yeah, I mean, so many wonderful pieces. I mean, I think part of what I've heard really, and Michele, please jump in, you know, is really that coordination, that internal coordination that has to happen, the clarity on capabilities, and that alignment on how we're executing to get there. You know, I mean, coordinating all of that is complex. Of course, I'm sure within a large organization like yours, Michele, please jump in.
You know, I just want to comment a couple of points that actually Yvette and you, Martina, shared regarding having the customer at the center of when we shape, you know, the content, and we, for example, we develop global value dossier, you know, if you could talk about access or other strategies. And, you know, I would like to here to bring another level of complexity that I don't know if you're all faced, and it is when working distributor market. I mean, distributor market could look like opportunistic, but if you think about, you know, a small biotech that decide to enter, no, a new therapy beyond the EU5, let's say in Europe, distributor market are critical. And here, you know, you always have the dilemma: how I listen the voice of the payer, how I listen the voice of the KOL, if I have the distributor in the middle. And so in my previous company, we tried to resolve, you know, this dilemma on co-engagement that actually are always very complex due to compliance limitation that exist. And I believe that actually the co-engagement opportunity bring a lot of value. First, you know, reduce this information asymmetry that exists between, you know, the market and then who has to build the messages, the story. There is also the big advantage that actually there is a strong recognition by the KOL or the payer by the fact that actually the originator sit along with the distributor and spend his time and show commitment, now that actually you are interested in the product and getting access selling. And then of course you also limit the risk in case of the distributor is phased out. But actually, I think this is another element we need to take into account when we say listening the voice of the customer to develop the content.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have barrier and you need to overcome this barrier.
Yeah, for sure. And even I see, you know, a question for us of how do we include parents of pediatric patients in stakeholder discussions. I know specifically when I think of incorporating the voice of the patient, you know, caregivers are an incredibly important stakeholder, specifically in rare disease for us, because many of the diseases we are approaching are pediatric based. But you know, I find that voice is very strong, especially in advocacy, because parents, as soon as they have a child that's impacted by any type of condition, they are vocal, loud, ready to go. And it's so wonderful to be able to bring in their voices via survey or our advocacy or ad boards. And so collecting that, just as we map other stakeholders in terms of advocacy or payers, you know, that caregiver voice, I think, is also a really critical one of ours as across the business, I'm sure, but specifically for us in rare disease.
And absolutely. And on that specific question, I think I would answer it as with a lot of empathy and sensitivity is how we
100%.
approach that. Because they are incredibly important, and they've got a lot to worry about. They've got a lot riding on what we're doing, and we need to approach it with a lot of sensitivity and empathy in order to work with them effectively.
Yeah, I think all of these maps, as we think about them, probably evolve over time, right? I think none of the for me, we are often considering how things are changing and evolving, and different groups come up over the life cycle of a product, over the life cycle of a disease state, and how you approach that can be very different. I wonder, when we think of how much technology has changed and evolved for us too, I mean, how do we think about AI and different, pilot programs there and incorporating that learning into maybe some of these insights and analytics? Michele, maybe you can share a little bit more on that.
Yeah, so a couple of points on, and I think everything here end up how we share, the insights across the different group in an efficient way. And no, I would say that there are a couple of elements. So at the moment, I'm working in a very lean organization. So I don't know if Martina for you is different, for you that's different, but actually I have, let's say, the privilege to be very lean. And always I have a dilemma on sharing this insight. On one side, we create process, we create technology that then actually, if you kind of oblige people not to share this information channel, on the other hand, we keep a more light structure and we standardize, if you like, the capabilities. So we take people that actually naturally share information, share the relevant information. And actually, I'm a big believer on this second aspect because we are professional. Um, I think often we need also to keep the capex low, and so the direction I'm going in my organization to share insights, every kind of insight from customer intelligence insights to insight coming from engagement, also medical. It is to bring professionals that are naturally that naturally have experience, to share and naturally share their funding and the relevant things from the market. I think another things we need to keep in mind in that context, it is, I mean, that could look like basic, but also the definition of insights. I found very much inconsistent across the organization, and there is not this tendency to go toward descriptive insights versus predictive insights. It is easier, it is more is understood by everybody, but actually I believe that what we need to push and to equate, if you like, our team is to go toward a diagnostic and eventually even a predictive insight generation and discussion. Then going on more the technology part in the specific. At the moment, we are piloting the capacity to use a co-pilot version for Vinci CRM. So now we are building the infrastructure, we are building more the prompt engineering. And actually, the idea is to automatically extract the sentiment and insight, the pattern out of the CRM engagement through this solution. We are not yet there. I still believe a lot in having capable people that naturally share the relevant insights, but I believe that's the direction probably we are going.
Perfect. It makes me also, when we think about measurement and measuring this success and KPI development, I think you're right. I think it's always an internal debate in terms of what we're tracking, what's effective across different customer types, what works well across, even within the same healthcare system, it can be quite complex. Maybe if you can comment on how you think about these KPIs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question, and this is an ongoing conversation. And I think we are in all our companies. Again, here we try to I like to operate in a very simple way. And let's say my big challenge, more from a commercial standpoint, it is to share, to pass the message that engaging is critical to the commercial organization. Because sometimes you start to work to talk to a GM at one point, he or she says, "Okay, look, I need to generate sales while we are talking too much about insight, about engaging, and so forth." So a way not to combine, let's say, these two words, the commercial and the KPI to track effectiveness engagement, it is a model that we call the impact tree. Impact tree is a simple equation that says volumes, time, channel, time, quality of the conversation means increasing market share. And volume can be translated in several different ways, from the simple simple monthly engagement to much more, a little bit more complex interaction rates to attainment, but that's the quantitative element, times the channel, that is the split, digital versus traditional. And also here we can go more sophisticated toward MCQ, so not the weighted engagement based on the effectiveness of the channel. And then on the quality, that is the third element, we can go from the classic MPS on group call, MPS on individual call, that's much more complex, to even CS that I think is not always appreciated, but I'm a big fan of that. And then link it to the market share. So this impact tree concept is something that I found very interesting, and I'm bringing around across company. So I already mentioned MCQ. I'm a big fan also of MCQ because it's an easy way also to measure and to give target from an impact perspective of the different engagement. And finally, I believe it's critical then to set target, to measure the effectiveness of our engagement. Now, I've been in this business as you guys for many years, and actually, honestly, I was never able to really call a target for the engagement. I always had to find kind of escamotage, and often I talk about ambitions. The ambition for that country is to achieve interaction rate of 2.3. The ambition to achieve a customer effective score of X. I believe this is also a mind change in the mind perception, a change management element. If we can really talk about target in how we engage, there's also a compliance, conversation we can have here, but it's critical to have a point of reference. Yeah, so that's my view on that topic around the KPI.
Yeah, for sure. I think I like the way that you think about it in a simple way, but obviously a very complex topic. Yeah, amazing. Martina, when you come to this question, how do you think about it, especially when it comes to outcomes, specific outcomes-based KPIs?
Yeah, I think, sitting in commercial, really, I think we're very lucky in that, there are a rafts, as Miguel talked about, GM will say, what's the market share? I want, what are the revenues? What's my first line usage, etc. We're awash with data sources really on the commercial side. But I think for the other functions like medical affairs or even market access, these are often much harder to measure in terms of hard outcomes. Certainly, in the medical side, we have done a lot of work on that in the last year because we had a tendency to measure a lot of activities, so activity-based metrics, and quality metrics as well, but with no true kind of way of measuring impact and outcome. And at the end of the day, we all want to measure the impact and the outcome of our work, right? So I thought I could share a little bit of the experience of the creation of this Astellas Medical Impact Model, AMI model, as we call it, because it seeks to create value in 4 connected steps. So it starts with the medical affairs activities, and those activities drive outputs, and then those outputs drive an outcome. And then that outcome should actually then have a measurable patient impact. So that's the principle, right? So if you start, instead of starting with the activities, which is where we traditionally start, if you start with the impact and work back, it makes sure that that you can set KPIs and activities that you can connect directly to the desired income. So maybe if I give an example to try to illustrate it, if the desired impact was a better overall patient survival in a specific cancer type in a specific country, if that's the desired impact, then the associated outcome to enable this could be, for example, driving a specific change in medical practice, let's say updated treatment guidelines, or maybe biomarker testing becoming standard or whatever. So these outcomes are identified, connected to the impact, and then specific KPIs can be set against those outcomes. For example, an update to the clinical guideline positioning for the treatment, for the drug treatment, a second line by X date, or the biomarker testing rates of 70% in 90% of treating hospitals, for example. So you can very clearly set very tangible KPIs around those outcomes. And then with this clarity, then the specific activities and the associated activity metrics, for example, number of guideline authored engagements to present clinical evidence, or number of hospital pathologists engaged on testing of biomarkers, those are much more clearly able to be set to connect to the desired outcome. So what we have implemented over the last year is that these AMI metrics are defined by each country medical team for each brand in that market, because obviously clearly the patient impact desired may be different market to market. And certainly the outcomes and the tactics will be different and tailored for the country in quote. But they are at the end of the day, they're you connect the activities ultimately to a higher to a desired outcome that has a patient impact that is measurable through the steps you take to get there. And it's been really very, very valuable because it enhances medical affairs focus on the visualization of impact and outcome rather than activities. And also then makes sure that there's kind of full alignment to drive the ultimate patient impact that the medical function are there to deliver. So I think it's been a really interesting exercise. It started actually in our region, and it's now been globalized as part of how medical affairs and Astellas globally will measure outcome and impact for medical affairs.
I mean, another tremendous approach. I really like that, again, that focus on the outcome, that center around, what is it you're trying to achieve is so critical, right? Maintaining that laser focus. And I see another question someone's asking us about, how do we push or think about sales with an innovative molecule when you're in a generics market? And I think this measurement system actually really resonates with that, because what you're talking about really is enabling a very value oriented conversation, right? You have to say, okay, what is your clinical differentiation? What's the economic value? Because you're going to have a lot of restraints within that market. And then what are the patient outcomes you're trying to see? And then to your point, like, how are we going to measure those outcomes, and what is it we're really looking for when it's an extremely competitive space that's focused potentially on price? Inette, maybe if you want to comment too on thinking through a situation like that.
Sure. I mean, we are actually facing that situation where we, have an innovative product in a very, very crowded space with a lot of low-cost agents already available. And so the approach we really are taking is really making sure we are very, very clear on what those patient needs are. And as we build our evidence base, working with patients in order to ensure that we can appropriately contextualize what those needs are, so that payers can understand where our treatment is going to fall within the spectrum of everything else that is available. And, we unfortunately today don't yet cure all diseases. So we still know there are a lot of patients who have unmet needs, and we want to be able to provide new agents to help address those. So it's really critical, again, to be working with the clinical, the scientific, and patient communities in order to make sure we have a clear understanding of that and are clearly communicating that to the right decision makers. And I think that goes to the model that Martina was speaking about, because ultimately it is really about that impact that we're having overall, not just on individual patient lives, but also on the healthcare system and society more broadly. And that's going to be very important for a lot of payers that are working in nationalized healthcare systems, right? So we have to think too about our product's impact not only on individual patients, but increasingly, how is that impacting on sustainability goals? How is that impacting on health equity goals? And so these are all things that we have to factor into the equation and think about as we're developing those strategies.
For sure. It goes maybe even deeper to some of the earlier points we were chatting about in terms of segmenting, right? Like when we're segmenting, what do the customers need within a complicated market like that? There's going to be, our innovators versus our cost-conscious prescribers, right? There's going to be a level of
Sure.
Attitude towards reimbursement, et cetera. And I think the more we understand that marketplace, going back to also Michele about our stakeholder management, how do we think about mapping and where these influencing circles come in? I think all of this comes back around whether you are launching a best-in-class molecule or you're launching into a competitive space. Yeah, all of these approaches, customer-centric space with segmentation and setting strong KPIs, I think really help to set us up at least to meet the customer need in the marketplace. Another question, maybe connecting back to connecting KPIs, but connecting leading KPIs to lagging KPIs and defining these, volume. Maybe not the indicator. I think it goes back to your model, Michele, of thinking about engagement, that channel, the quality, that piece. Maybe if you want to comment on this question of share of impact.
Yeah, so yes, I was reading this specific question around generic dominated market. I think you are referring to that one, no?
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question because actually it says how to introduce an innovator in a generic dominated market. Probably I would say how we behave from a competitive point of view when generic coming in the market, because launching an innovative molecule in a generic dominated market looks a bit strange. So I would say probably the other way around. And the way in which we in the past we addressed that situation was really to introducing digital native, digital first engagement. So actually working on the cost of the engagement, so mainly working on the OpEx, and really identified way where the first touch point was without the human intervention. So being totally digital, using even product specific website, disease awareness website, or even going to webinar event. So in that way, we could really focus on the physical conversation only to the healthcare professionals that are more receptive to the old originator rather than the new generic. So, to take that question, I would say that probably working on the OpEx element around the cost of the engagement, going digital first, limiting the impact in terms of effectiveness would be a solution. This is how I would operate in that context.
Yeah, fair. And thinking also about the value differentiation, organizations can offer. Sometimes, the opportunities around patient support, specific from a value creation. So I'm thinking, when we think of the patient journey, how are we supporting them along the way? It's more than just a cost piece, because often, journeys can be complicated, and how do we support that and think about that? So I think there's also a suite of things that you can offer to help support and differentiate, to be able to support patient groups and communities that are a little bit more than just on the cost basis. I think that's why it's so critical for us as we're doing some stakeholder mapping, understanding this multi-channel environment, to understand that outcome, that value-based piece across the way. And maybe Martina, just in thinking about your approach between this global to local connection and the feedback loop, one question that I did want to follow up with you on that was, how does that feedback loop work? How are you getting that input and kind of the iterations over time? Because from coming from a smaller organization, it feels like that could be a very big process.
Yeah, it is, and it's multifaceted, a little bit like Michele has talked about there, because the insights and the feedback loops come from lots of different sources, right? So obviously we've got all the analytics in the world from our omni-channel engagements, and but understanding and tailoring those data insights to actually interpret what they mean is a really critical skill set within any organization. Then, of course, nothing beats the insights of the people who are closest to the customer. And this is why we have focused very much on empowering local brands at the center teams. So we formed our brand teams as close as possible to the customer interface, the cross-functional, the multiple stakeholder customer interface. And they are constantly engaging and bringing insights into the brand team, sharing them in an open and opportune way, and then deciding collectively, what does this mean for us in our local market for our brand now, and then validating them with the data sources, from, as I say, omni-channel and other trackers and other data sources that they have, to generate a holistic picture. So that then helps them course correct and adapt their activities and focus and engagement externally, but it also helps them to bring back into the central global teams who are working on the strategies to say, actually, this piece isn't working, or this piece actually is completely off the mark in our market, our other markets hearing that. And so we have various internal fora that help that sharing to amplify what's working and what's not working, and to respond quite quickly. So those local brands at the center teams are connected to the global brands at the center teams, and we have a channel for those insights coming in quite quickly. So it sounds simple when I say it, but of course it's complex. It
Complicated,
doesn't
yes.
always work, and actually, what we're trying to do though is underpin it with a new agile approach, and sort of saying, be quick, don't set the plan and stick to the plan, be quick, respond, change, be empowered to move and to try something new or whatever, because I think the world is moving so fast. Our customer expectations are evolving daily. We're consistently as an industry not necessarily reaching our customer expectations. So we have to listen carefully, adapt quickly, and be on point to pivot and to respond. So yeah, it's a complex process, would completely agree. But I think the important thing for companies to do is to find out where the insights are coming from, and have multiple approaches to share them quickly and to act on them. Like, there's no point in thinking about them, but just act quickly, try something new. If it doesn't work, try again. This kind of agile mindset.
100%. I think it's a good point to all of us. Now I think as our business has been changing, our internal organizations have been changing. I'm sure, I know that you guys have transformed the way the business has been working, as other companies are doing too. I think it's a challenge of, as we're trying to understand our customer mindset, we have to understand our own mindset and
Yes.
be willing to kind of jump in and say, my role is not just HCP. My role has moved beyond what this box is, and I'm trying to think of a broader landscape and be comfortable with the fact that I may not have 100% certainty on what I'm working on. Maybe I need to just tackle it by a business problem, work on that, solve it, move on. And this is hard change for people when we're used to having very strict capabilities that we're working towards. But I think this agility is really necessary to meet the evolving needs of the customer. Well, we have a few more minutes left. There's another question in the chat, so maybe we can jump into this one. But really, what are the key elements to differentiate, one pharma company from another? It's a great question. How do we think about differentiating ourselves when we may all be sounding the same? Thoughts?
I think that may be the subject for an entirely different
New
webinar as well.
webinar. Could be.
I mean, it's a very interesting question, and I think it's one that, as individual companies, we probably need to do some self-examination of, because in addition to wanting to set ourselves apart, we also need to work together and in partnership oftentimes as well.
100%.
And I think, if we go back to Martina's example about starting with really understanding what that impact is, if we're thinking about ultimately how we're improving patient outcomes in any one area, it's not just one product or one solution that's going to work for the healthcare system, for the individual, for all the different dynamics of the system. So how we work together is actually really important. So I would answer this question by saying, with a very authentic approach that starts with, understanding what we compete, and there are very legal and compliance regulations around working together, but we also work together in order to help improve healthcare systems, help to make the healthcare system more equitable and more sustainable. And so I think we get a lot of kudos from our clinical stakeholders, from payer stakeholders, when they see as an industry that we are working together to move the needle in positive ways for the healthcare system.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think sometimes when I think even specifically, we've gone down the road, as we've embraced digital, often many of us have created hubs and go in and you say, okay, you'll learn about the disease state in this hub. But the truth is, one poor physician, if you think about it from their perspective, has to log in 5 times if they're a general practitioner to understand what's happening within the hub. So was that really useful? Or would it be better for us to create one central space where we're contributing information, and it's, almost like a pharma Wikipedia. I don't know, making it up, but just I think
Exactly.
thinking about this approach, what's really centric to the customer, not just from our own needs of sales, but holistically, I think goes a long way to that trust and credibility, and making it relevant for the customer, I think is really what's going to help us in the long run. Because most of us are not just in one disease state for, let's say, a decade or longer. Like we're building relationships with specialists, over decades, because we're launching other products along those same lines, right? So I think this is a long-term game that we really need to nurture over time together.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Exactly.
love that.
Yeah, and just to add a very, very specific examples, and when you're working in, I've worked in areas before, kind of larger rare diseases where they were dominated by a couple of a few little industry players for a long, long time, and then all of a sudden the science changed, and there was an explosion of new players, some big players, some smaller players, all different kinds of technologies coming into the marketplace. And I think, the mainstay players in that disease area were a little caught off guard by that. They felt they kind of owned the relationships and they owned the leadership, and they had, they were sort of entitled to it. And it was really, I think, the commitment demonstrated by some of those smaller players when they came into that market to be a very authentic partner with patient communities, with clinician stakeholders. They really worked to earn the trust.
Yeah.
And they were able to make a real difference. And I think it also changed the behaviors of kind of the stalwart organizations.
Yeah, for sure.
And they started to take a less transactional approach with those stakeholders and invested in a much more partnership-oriented approach as well.
Yeah. Yeah, great discussion. I really love thinking around that. I think we, again, as we are really partnering, hearing the needs of the customer, maybe that sounds a little generic, but I think that really holds true. Well, I thank you so much. And maybe any last comments? And I think we're at time, so appreciate everybody's time and joining us and listening too.
Thank you for having us today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Really enjoyed the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.